Daring ideas and bold endeavors have always defined the American spirit. At every crossroad throughout its history, this country has stepped forward as a leader and pioneer for change. From the revolution that won its freedom to challenges at home and abroad, America has always responded, rising to its feet, ready to build again. Through hard work and a willingness to learn, each generation of American craftsmen has responded to the nation's needs. And today, professional roof mechanics continue the tradition of innovation, working with revolutionary products, yet always mindful of age-old principles.
Hello, and welcome to this National Roofing Contractors Association's program, Application of Single-Ply Membrane Flashings, another in NRCA's Roof Application Training Program series.
In this program, you're going to learn about the components used to install single-ply flashings and important safety tips for working on single-ply jobs. And you'll learn application skills for installing vertical and horizontal single-ply flashings.
You'll also get a chance to practice the skills you learn in your in-shop and on-the-job training sessions. Keeping in mind our motto, roofing is what we do, safely is how we do it. Let's get started.
Renegades and rogues. For a time, they ruled the West. Their law was the law of the gun. Dime novels told tales of desperados, such as Billy the Kid and Jesse James. But the West changed. Families came, wanting houses and schools. Merchants needed stores, and every town wanted a church with a steeple. Lonely trails became busy streets, and towns grew up on the prairie. For the desperados, there was only one way out of town. The West was a land of opportunity for anyone willing to learn and grow. And wherever you live today, opportunity still awaits as you learn more about your craft and grow in your professional roofing skills.
In part one of this video, you're going to add to your skill base by gaining a solid understanding of single-ply flashing concepts and components. Let's begin.
As you know, flashings protect the most vulnerable areas of a roof system. Flashings weatherproof or seal a roof system at perimeter edges, penetrations, walls, expansion joints, drains, or any other place a roof system surface is interrupted. If you recall, built-up and modified bitumen roof systems generally use cant strips at vertical flashings, but when you flash a single-ply roof system, cant strips generally aren't used. Typically, single-ply field membranes are attached to the substrate independent of the flashing plies. Because of wind loads and the tendency of some single-ply membranes to shrink, the field membranes should be securely attached. If they aren't, they may pull the flashings loose. Generally, flashing membranes are partially or fully adhered and then mechanically attached along their top edge. The procedures for seaming and splicing single-ply flashing sheets are basically the same as for field sheets. Flashing ply laps are applied so that water will run over the seams and not buck against them. 3 types of materials can be used for installing single-ply flashings: membrane, plastic, and metal. You'll learn how these materials are used to construct flashings as you gain more experience. You will learn how to perform 2 types of flashing installation: vertical and horizontal. Vertical flashings are installed on walls, ventilators, roof hatches and skylights, curbs, expansion joints, and area dividers. Horizontal flashings include roof drains, metal edge flashings or gravel stop, gutter edges, plumbing soil pipe vents, pitch pockets, and flanged accessories.
Well, we've reached the end of part one. Before we move on to part two, let's quickly review what we've covered.
First, you were reminded that flashings protect the most vulnerable areas of a roof system. Then, you saw some application basics for single-ply flashings, focusing on their attachment, component materials, and vertical and horizontal flashing installations.
Being open to learning is an essential quality for success in any career. The roofing industry is changing all the time. So, practice the skills you know and keep learning. It pays off. See you in part 2.
The gold rush of 1849 was a magnet for adventurers from all over the world. They came by the thousands with dreams of making a fast fortune. In 1853, this man struck it rich, but not with gold. He took some plain, tough canvas and with a needle and thread stitched together a pair of pants. The specifications he used were just right. The pants were sturdy, and pretty soon they became popular with the miners. The man's name was Levi Strauss, and his creation became known as Levi jeans.
Which just goes to show you, things we take for granted every day often were created for a practical purpose. In part 2 of this video, we're going to look at the flashing materials and the specifications that you'll use for single-ply membranes.
Let's start with a slip sheet. It's a thin sheet of material applied between a membrane and substrate. A slip sheet helps prevent these materials from sticking together. Although seldom used in flashing applications, slip sheets can help protect flashing components from damage in certain situations. There are both solvent and water-based bonding adhesives used to adhere single-ply flashings to substrates. Another important material used with some thermoset membranes is seam tape, which is non-reinforced and has a craft paper or plastic peel-away surfacing. Be careful when handling seam tape, it really sticks. Inner seam sealant is a compound that's placed on the innermost edge of the bottom layer in some membrane seams or splices. Inner seam sealant helps prevent moisture from penetrating the adhesive bond from underneath. Splice adhesive is solvent-based and is used to bond and seal certain single-ply membranes together. It's a good idea to protect your hands and eyes when you handle splice adhesive. In poorly ventilated areas, you may need to use a respirator. Another method of preventing moisture from getting into a lap or membrane reinforcement is to apply lap sealant. This special sealant is applied on the exposed edges of some flashing and membrane seams, particularly at cut membrane edges. Before applying this sealant, the seam edges should first be probed to check their integrity. The roof membranes used for flashings are typically the same used in the field. Some flashing specs may call for reinforced and non-reinforced flashing membrane in the same application. But you will also find this non-reinforced EPDM material used with many flashing applications. This material is uncured and remains very flexible. It can be formed around corners and curves, and then, after it cures, it retains its new shape. Some manufacturers provide pre-formed inside and outside corners that can save time, create a neater appearance, and add strength to a flashing corner. Some flashing accessories are made from metal or plastic, like this termination strip that strengthens the mechanical attachment. Ballast retainers are plastic or metal accessories that prevent ballast from being washed over the roof's edge or down drains, and at the same time allow water to drain. Sometimes you will install pre-formed pipe collars, and some flashing specs call for cellular foam plastic tubes installed like cant strips. Some manufacturers provide sheet metal with a bonded coating of the same thermoplastic compound as the sheet. This coated metal can be fabricated into a flashing. The advantage is that the field sheets can be heat welded directly to the coated metal. You may also install metal cap flashings that cover and protect the upper edge of a vertical flashing. Metal edge flashings cover and protect the outer edges of a roof membrane as well. One common metal edge flashing you'll see is often called a gravel stop, used to retain aggregate ballast from washing over the roof's edge. You'll learn how to install these and many other kinds of metal flashings in a future program. Other components include fastener systems that secure flashing membranes. There are various fastener types that are combined with metal or plastic bars, plates, and strips to secure flashing membranes. The last component may be a surfacing, occasionally applied to thermoset membrane flashing.
It's important that you become familiar with these components. You'll be using them a lot. Okay, now let's move on to specs. They give critical information about how to install flashings.
The specs will tell you the types, quantities, and combinations of materials to use, kinds of adhesives, minimum overlap for side and end laps, and seaming methods. Specs provide minimum and maximum height requirements for flashing single-ply jobs, typically 8 inches to 36 inches. Check your workbook for information about flashing heights that exceed 36 inches. It's your supervisor's job to check the specs and learn the fastener type, quantity, and spacing required for the job. So if you're not sure or have any questions, don't hesitate to ask him.
Specification details can vary a great deal from one manufacturer to another. Let's check out an example of how two manufacturers can provide different specs for the same job.
Let's start with a vertical wall flashing. Manufacturer A's specs call for field sheets to be attached in the field near the wall but not turned up the vertical surface. They also call for a foam tube set in the transition angle. The flashing sheet to be bonded 6 inches out onto the field, extended up the wall a minimum of 8 inches, and fully adhered with bonding adhesive to the wall. The flashing membrane is secured to the wall with fasteners 12 inches on center through a plastic termination bar. Finally, water block sealant is applied at the top edges. Now let's look at manufacturer B's specs for the same wall. These specs first call for a membrane reinforcing strip to be secured at the base of the wall and the field sheet to be extended continuously up the vertical surface at least 8 inches, adhered only to the membrane reinforcing strip. The field sheet is then mechanically attached along the top edge, 6 inches on center, and covered with a metal counter flashing.
Now, let's take a look at two different specs for the same horizontal flashing.
Manufacturer A's specs tell you to extend a field sheet at least 4 inches beyond and fold it over the edge. Secure it to wood blocking with plastic cap nails. A clad metal edge flashing gets secured over the membrane, and a membrane stripping ply is sealed 4 inches back from the edge of the metal flange onto the field and to the clad metal flange. Manufacturer B calls for a 2-piece pre-finished metal edge flashing to be secured to the wood blocking. Use just the first piece for now. Then wrap the field membrane over its top edge and secure it. Finally, attach the second piece of metal flashing over the field ply. The second piece secures the field membrane to the edge. 2 applications, 2 very different sets of specifications, both accomplishing the same job. But there are reasons a roof system designer may use one method over another, so it's important to follow the specs for your specific job.
Well, that wraps up part 2. Before we move on, let's quickly look back at what we just covered.
You became more familiar with the components for flashing single-ply jobs. Then, you checked out the materials used to make up flashings, including membranes, plastic and metals, and some of the fasteners you'll use. Sometimes, a surfacing application may be required. Finally, you learned how flashing specs can differ a great deal, even with the same material. Remember, always check the specs with your supervisor to make sure you're using the right procedure.
Keep up the good work, and join me in part 3 to learn about application methods for vertical flashings.
When the renegade forefathers decided to give the boot to the British in 1776, they fought them on land, on water, even beneath the water. Way back then, an American submersible called the Turtle attacked the British flagship HMS Eagle in New York Harbor, but failed to attach the mine it was carrying to the larger ship's hull.
That mission may have tanked, but those early design principles were later used to develop more efficient submarines. And that's what's important, building on knowledge and experience. In part 3 of this program, you're going to add to your skills by becoming more familiar with vertical flashing application methods. Let's get to it.
Your first task is preparation. Make sure the surfaces that will receive the flashings are sufficiently smooth, clean, and dry. If called for, you may need to first apply a primer coat or slip sheet. Though seldom used, a slip sheet helps prevent materials from sticking together. Be sure the field membrane has been secured following the specs. Now, measure the width needed and cut the flashing strips. The flashing strips for single-ply applications are typically cut longer than those for other roof systems. Lay the strips alongside the area to be flashed. If you are using seam tape, prepare the surface and apply the tape before adhering the flashing strip into place, but leave the backing on the tape. To fully adhere vertical flashings, apply bonding adhesive to the substrate and back side of the flashing strip. Allow it to dry until tacky, then adhere the strips into place. Then attach the top of the vertical flashing to the substrate with mechanical fasteners. Finish by seaming the bottom edges of the flashings to the field membrane. Many specs today allow the field membrane to be turned at least 8 inches up the wall to serve as the flashing. This procedure usually requires specific fastening details, like the addition of this membrane reinforcement strip.
Nearly every vertical flashing includes inside or outside corners. Specific details and procedures for corners can vary from one manufacturer or system to another. So be sure you understand the specs before you perform these tasks. Here are a few general tips you'll need to work in and around corners.
When approaching an inside corner, measure and cut the membrane strips long enough to wrap around the inside corner from both sides. As you set each strip into the corner, the excess material will form a small flap, commonly called a pig ear. Do not cut this flap. You will fold and bond it in place as directed by the system specs. Next, a reinforcing corner boot may be installed. As we mentioned earlier, there are many pre-manufactured corner boots that save time, but they won't work in every situation, so you'll need to know how to construct your own. To do this, cut a square piece of membrane to fit in the corner. Fold this piece in half lengthwise, then fold it again. Set the folded corner of this piece into the inside corner. Proceed to unfold and bond the boot into place. You will notice when you unfold the boot that it will also form a pig ear flap. Again, don't cut this flap. It should be folded down and bonded in place. For outside corners, the flashing strips are simply wrapped around the corner and continued on the other side. You may need to cut the bottom to help form the strip around the corner and out onto the field. You may then need to bond an outside corner boot over the wrapped corner. A lap sealant may also be required around all exposed flashing membrane edges, including the corner boot. And finally, most vertical flashings are finished with either a metal counter flashing, term bar, or wall cap flashing, and sometimes with an application of liquid-applied protective surfacing. You'll learn how to apply them in NRCA's program, Application of Single-Ply Membranes, Field and Surfacing.
That's the end of this section. So let's quickly review what you've learned.
There are a lot of things to think about when you install vertical flashings on single-ply jobs. The surface must be sufficiently clean, dry, as smooth as possible, and in good condition. Check the specs with your supervisor for all details. Know how flashings are supposed to be installed. Be smart before you start. You saw how to measure and cut vertical flashing strips, including inside and outside corners, bond them, mechanically fasten them to the vertical substrate, and seal the bottom of the flashing strip to the field. Finally, you learned that vertical flashings are finished with either a metal counter flashing, term bar, or wall cap flashing, and sometimes a liquid applied surfacing.
If this seems like a lot to remember, don't worry. You'll get to practice these applications in your in-shop and on-the-job training. Meantime, join me in Part 4 for application methods for horizontal flashing.
any given Sunday in fall or winter, Americans are glued to their TV sets watching teamwork, strategy, and brute force in action, their favorite football teams. From the moment they suit up, the players focus on a plan with one objective in mind: to get that pigskin across the goal line. Every team has its own plan for success, and every team member, from the giant fullbacks to the agile quarterback, has a role to play in that game plan.
Your team of professional roofing mechanics follows a strategy too. And in part 4, you're going to look at the plan you need to install horizontal flashings.
The family of horizontal flashings includes roof drains, metal edge flashings, flanged accessories, and vents through the roof, or VTRs. First, let's look at interior drains. All preparation work for either new or existing drains must be completed before the field membrane is applied. First, temporarily block the drain using rigid material that can't fall down the pipe, or use a plug made for this purpose. If you are working on a re-roofing project, the next step will be to remove the drain's compression ring. To do this, you must first remove the ring's retaining bolts. To avoid breaking the bolts while removing them, first soak them with penetrating oil. If the bolts do break, you will have to drill out the holes and re-tap them for new bolts. That can be very time-consuming, or the drain may need to be replaced. To remove the compression ring, tap it carefully along its bottom edge using a pry bar and hammer until you work the ring loose. Don't pry up too hard on the ring, as it can easily break. New compression rings and retaining bolts are often required for some applications. Thoroughly clean and scrape the drain bowl and compression ring. Use a wire brush to remove any rust. The membrane manufacturer may also require a primer be applied. The specs may then call for a reinforcing sheet, often referred to as a target sheet, to be installed around the drain head either prior to or after the field membrane application. A target sheet provides additional membrane strength at this vulnerable area. Your supervisor will tell you the type of membrane to use and how it should be installed, as it varies from system to system. The drain location should have been marked on top of the field membrane when it was installed. Find the center of the drain and, using shears, cut out a circle for the drain opening, about half the diameter of the drain bowl. You may also have to cut out small holes aligned over the retaining ring bolt holes. A liberal amount of water block or appropriate sealant is then applied between the drain bowl flange and the membrane. Now, reinstall the compression ring, clamping it down evenly and tight so the sealant is compressed between the membrane and drain bowl to form a gasket. Trim back the membrane in the drain bowl so it does not extend more than about 1/4 of an inch beyond the clamping ring. And don't forget, remove the drain plug and install the strainer basket at the end of each day's work.
If you're going to apply an aggregate or paver surface, the field membrane may need ballast retainers. Some interior drains may already have one built in. Let's move on now and look at metal edge flashings.
Metal edge flashings are typically made from various types of sheet metal. Generally, they are made with a flange extending horizontally back onto the field of the roof, set in a continuous bead of sealant. Before field sheets or flashings are applied, however, the edges of the roof system generally require preservative-treated wood nailers. Check that these nailers are well secured before proceeding. If not, report this to your supervisor immediately. Field membranes should be attached to the wood nailers before the edge flashings are installed. A 2-piece snap-lock design edge flashing typically doesn't require a stripping ply. But in some cases, the edge flashing will need a stripping ply to be lapped back onto the field membrane and sealed. The stripping ply is then bonded to the flange.
Now, let's check out flanged accessories and how to flash them into a field membrane.
Some examples of flanged accessories include vents, scuppers, pipe sleeves, pitch pans, and flanged roof drains. Any accessory with a flat flange that lays on top of a field membrane. These are made from various types of metals or plastic. Again, check the specs with your supervisor. The flanges may or may not require fasteners. To install a flanged accessory, first set it in place over the field membrane and check for a good fit. Mark the outline of the flange over the field membrane. Add about 6 inches extra all around and then remove the accessory. The flanged accessory will usually also need to be secured. The roof system specs might call for mechanically attaching the field membrane around the penetration. Now, measure and cut a stripping ply so it extends out beyond the flange to the area you have marked. Tightly trim the sheet around the accessory. And finally, follow the manufacturer's bonding and seaming directions to seal the stripping ply to the flange and the field. Again, check the specs with your supervisor. You may need to apply sealant at the edges of the stripping ply where it joins the flange.
On a single ply job, you're going to see a lot of VTRs, or vents through the roof, like soil pipe stacks and flanged collar type penetrations. How do you apply flashings around them?
There are 2 basic methods: field fabricated and preformed flashings. To install field fabricated flashings, first measure and cut the flashing sheet so the opening is smaller than the penetration. A non-reinforced membrane is typically used for this task, especially for smaller penetrations. Make sure the field sheet is formed tightly around the penetration. Measure and cut a strip of membrane to wrap around the penetration. Then, bond the vertical seam of this strip to itself and to the field sheet. Now, apply a sealant at the top and secure the flashing to the penetration using a stainless steel pipe clamp. To install factory preformed flashings, first trim and fit the flashing to the penetration. Then, bond the flashing to the field membrane. Again, secure the top of the flashing using a stainless steel pipe clamp and apply sealant at the top edge. Another accessory used to seal around penetrations is a pitch pocket or pitch pan. A pitch pan is made with a flange and helps to form a seal around pipes, conduits, metal brackets, and other small penetrations. Install the pitch pan and seal it to the field membrane as you would any flanged accessory. Typically, the interior of the pitch pan is partially filled with a non-shrink grout, and then filled to the top with a pourable sealer as recommended by the specs. Generally, the sealer is overfilled and, as it becomes firm, is troweled up high to create a small slope away from the penetration.
We've reached the end of this program, so let's quickly review what you've learned.
In Part 1, you became familiar with the basic concepts of single-ply membrane flashings. You reviewed the areas of a roof where they are installed, the types of material used to construct flashings, and vertical penetrations and horizontal flashing requirements. In Part 2, you learned about the material components that are used to flash penetrations, and were reminded to wear protective gloves and eyewear when handling solvents and chemicals. You also checked out different specifications for flashings. Remember, specs can differ a lot, even for the same type of material. In Part 3, you learned about application methods for vertical flashings, including attaching field membranes at these points. You saw how to apply flashing strips, including outside and inside corners, and how vertical flashings are finished with counter flashings, cap flashings, and, if required, a protective liquid applied coating. In Part 4, you saw how to apply horizontal flashings, including interior roof drains, metal edge flashings, soil pipe stacks, and pitch pans. The American spirit is bold and innovative, bolstered by a history of success, and inspired by possibilities for the future. America is a story unfolding, filled with tales of everyday people who achieve the extraordinary through hard work and determination.
You're a part of this story too. Keep practicing the skills you learn and work together as a team. Most of all, remember that roofing is what we do, safely is how we do it. See you next time.